Scriptures is this is a lesson, Sunday school lesson. I wanted to talk on being brought into God's family and two mothers in particular. That's be the title of the lesson we're going to go through today. Now, I looked up the definition of a family. And a family is defined with several different definitions, but it is, number one definition is a group of one or more parents and their children living together as a unit. So that's a family. Second definition is descendants of a common ancestor. So that would be like family and extended family. And then the third definition is a biological definition, and it means a group of related things in biological terms. Now, to define a woman, which is, kind of a thing now, but according to the dictionary, it says it is a woman basically nurtures. She's known as the nurturer, and to nurture is the process of caring for and encouraging the growth or development of someone or something. And so that's a woman's role in the household, according to the Bible, is to nurture. That is her role. And so basically it's the process of caring for and encouraging the growth or development for someone or something, and that would primarily be the family unit. Okay? And then men are known as protectors and providers, is what men are known for in their role in the family unit. And the definition of protector is the second person in charge of a kingdom during the minority absence or incapacity of the sovereign. Who would have ever thought? That's what the protector is. Let me read that again and let that sink in now. As the man's role in protecting his family, it is the second person in charge of a kingdom during the minority absence or incapacity of the sovereign. So basically, a man's role is to look after and protect his family while he's waiting on his sovereign to come back. Think about that. That's amazing. Now, in order to become part of a family, you have to take the family name, and the father gives the family name. This is really interesting. If you could turn over to Ephesians chapter number 3, this is where we're going to start. If you don't have it or you just, can't get there quick enough, I'll read it. But anyway, in Ephesians chapter number 3, verses number 14 and 15 says, "For this cause I bow my knees unto the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, of whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named." So that name, so when you become part of the Lord's family, you are named. You take on His name when you become part of God's family. And then the next verses I'm going to look at is in 2 Corinthians chapter number 6. 2 Corinthians chapter number 6, verses number 17 and 18. If you want to write just the verses down or whatever. But it says, "Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty." And so what he wants to do is separate you from the other people that's not his, and then you will become sons and daughters, and he will become your father, saith the Lord Almighty. And so that is what essentially you become when you take on the Lord's name. And this is really interesting. How do you get saved? The Bible says, "For whosoever shall call upon the" what? "The name of the Lord shall be saved." And so we are saved, or you get born again, by calling on His name, on Christ's name. And so that's how you get saved. And you say, well, what does it look like to become part of His family? Well, now we'll step back in time and we'll start looking at what it looked like. When Christ first died on the cross, was buried, rose again the third day, and then he ascended up into heaven, he appeared to many people after his resurrection, and then after that he went up to heaven to stay up there. And anyway, at that time, basically, they were really bold. So his family was bold right after that happened. But then they started to suffer persecution, and they started to hunt them down. So to be a member of the Lord's family basically meant you were persecuted. They would hunt you down, and they would kill you because you opposed the Jewish religion. Well, then over time kept going, and then during Roman times is the next most popular time period that we talk about. But basically the people were mocked and ridiculed in Rome as Christians, and because they were part of God's family. And then not only that, but they were in danger. And in Rome, we know about the Roman Colosseums and how they would torture them and make fun of them. And in other countries, that's what it looks like to be a part of his family, a part of the Lord's family. It's not that appealing looking, is it? If you look at it from an outsider, it doesn't look appealing to be part of the Lord's family. And then we keep going all the way down, and even today, people are mocked and ridiculed and hunted down. And in several countries, if they find out you're a Christian, they'll kill you instantly. They'll put you on trial and kill you. Churches are hunted down and split up, and they kill everybody involved in the underground churches in certain countries. So to be a part of the Lord's family has always meant that you're in danger, or that you suffer persecution. And he said you would. He even said, you'll suffer persecution if you follow my commandments. And so we know that. But then, we also know that someday we believe that there'll be a rapture. And then to look at the Lord's family, they'll be raptured out. And after they're raptured out of here, the world will laugh and they'll think, yay, good riddance. We finally got rid of them, But then there'll be Christians come up during the tribulation period. There'll be people born again during the tribulation period. And then they're going to be hunted down and massacred the same. And then, while that's going on, we believe that the marriage supper of the Lamb is going to be going on. And so if you look at it, you've got the family up in heaven gathered around the table. And on earth, you've got the persecution going on like normal. And then after that, we have the Lord's church or his family coming back on white horses as warriors. And so instead of being viewed as weak and mild and tempered, they're going to come back as rulers during the millennial reign. And that's how they'll be viewed during the 1,000-year reign of the Lord. And so then they'll be viewed as that. The other thing that is particular is that his family, when you look at his family, they'll live forever in heaven. His family will all be gathered around in heaven, and they'll be doing what they do in heaven and in the new earth. And so that's what the Lord's family looks like. And then let me tell you a little story. So we were over at Hillcrest Baptist Church. That's where Lydia got saved at, my daughter. And so when she was there, after she got saved that day, we basically all got in the car and we were on our way home. And she just started bawling. She started crying in the car, and she started like heaving, crying. And I didn't know if something had happened to her or what. I mean, she just started bawling in the car. And I said, "What is it, Lydia? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I kind of slowed down, and I was about to pull the car over. And she goes, "I just realized I'm not going to hell." She got saved, and she realized she doesn't have to go to hell. And so being part of the Lord's family, when you take on his name, it simply means that you don't have to worry about going to hell anymore. And that's just a beautiful thing. And so you don't have to worry about going to hell, and then you'll be gathered with your heavenly Father in the new heaven. Now, so that's in terms of taking on his name. But now let's look at some neighbors for just a minute. Let's look at the family's neighbors. Turn to Exodus chapter number 2. Exodus chapter number 2. I want to point out somebody that's really interesting. Exodus chapter number 2. Exodus chapter number 2, and if you'll look down in verse number 5, I wanted to focus in on this one lady in particular. In Exodus chapter 2, verse number 5, and it says, "And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river." And notice it just refers to as Pharaoh's daughter. She doesn't have a name yet. But then it says right here, she came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's edge. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And so basically, here's Pharaoh's daughter. She's down by the river. She's taking a bath in the river. And then all of a sudden, this ark comes floating down the river, and she sees it. It's caught over there. And then I'm guessing that the baby started crying, because it said when she opened up the ark, she sent one of her servants over there. They go over there, they get the ark, they bring it back to her, and then they open it up. And when she opened it, there was a baby boy in there crying, and it was Moses, of course. It was Moses in the little ark. And so she basically... She pulled that baby out of the water and drew him out of the water. But notice all the way through that chapter, it keeps referring to her as Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter, Pharaoh's daughter. You'll see that phrase over and over and over and over again. But then, so she basically, all of a sudden, Miriam, Moses' sister, goes over there and she says, "Hey, do you want me to go get a wet nurse to nurse the baby and help you raise the baby?" She said, "Sure, and I'll pay her to do it too." So she goes and she gets, Moses' mom and gets, and then raises him. But now turn over to 1 Chronicles chapter number 4. And this is going to take on a whole new spin on something you may not have seen before. I didn't know this. I thought this was really interesting. In 1 Chronicles chapter number 4, and if you want to write this verse down, this is really cool. 1 Chronicles chapter number 4, verse number 18. In 1 Chronicles chapter number 4, verse number 18, and it says, "And his wife Jehudah bare Jared, the father of Gedor, and Heber, the father of Soko, and Jehuthiel, the father of Zahonah. And these are the sons of who? Bethiah. The who? Daughter of Pharaoh." Now she's got a name, and not only does she have a name, which Mered took. Now Mered is Ezra's son. So basically, Pharaoh's daughter, now let's put this whole thing together. So Pharaoh's daughter saw the baby, took pity on the baby because she knew it was a Hebrew child. She helped raise that baby, but then she started dwelling among the Hebrews, left Pharaoh, and then she actually married a Hebrew. And then when she married that Hebrew, she went out with them out of Egypt. So she evidently, during the Passover, stayed with the Hebrews, and then she left out in the Exodus where Moses led the children out of Israel. So basically, you got Pharaoh's daughter, is how she was referred to before. Then once she started turning to faith, and she believed in the Lord, started believing His words, then she took on a name. And then when she took that name on, then she was part of His family. And in fact, she's in the lineage of a lot of the Hebrews. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, it notates all that. Isn't that amazing? The other thing that I thought was really neat, so I started looking at it, and I was wondering, well, who was Ramses II is who they believe this Pharaoh was. And in fact, it says it in the Bible. It says it was Ramses. But anyway, Ramses II is who, according to antiquity, it is. And anyway, his firstborn son, do you know what his name means? firstborn son's name means with his strong arm. Now, has that phrase rung a bell anywhere? When you read the story of Exodus, God says, I will take you out with what? My strong arm. My arm will deliver you. My arm. And he keeps using that phrase from there forward through the whole Bible. But guess who died the night of the Passover? Pharaoh lost his right arm, his son, and he's the one who died. So I thought that was really neat. Now, let's talk about the night. Turn over to Joshua chapter number 2. Joshua chapter number 2. And this story here, this is one of the most fascinating stories to me. I mean, there's tons of them, but this is one of them that I've always thought was really interesting. In Joshua chapter number 2, I'm going to highlight a word in several verses. And you may want to just write these verses down if you don't want to turn to all of them or whatever. But anyway, in Joshua chapter number 2, verse number 1, it says, And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into an harlot's house. Notice it called her place a house, named Rahab, and lodged there. So they went to Rahab the harlot's house, and they stayed there in that house. Now let's look at verse number 3 in this same chapter. And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come unto thee, which are entered into thy what? House. For they come to search out all the country. And then we look down at, and we look over into Joshua chapter number 6. Joshua chapter number 6. And it says, And the city shall be accursed, even it, and all that are therein to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all that are within with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. Okay? And so notice it keeps calling it a house, a house, a house, a house. And so then we get on over, let's flip back to Joshua chapter number 2, verse number 18. And in Joshua chapter number 2, verse number 18, it says, Behold, and when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window which thou didst let us down by. Thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy father's household where? Home. Into the home. And notice it's always a house until she joined the Lord's family, and then she's got a what? She's got a home. And then it says, Home unto thee. But let's look back into Joshua here in chapter number 2. There's a few things that's really neat. If you look back up in Joshua chapter 2, number 11, and it says, As soon as we had heard these things, now this is Rahab talking here. She's talking about what she had heard. And she heard all these rumors up in verse 10 about how they basically are, how God delivered them out of Egypt, how they're going forth and they're conquering all these nations. And then she says in verse number 11, And as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt. That's the fear of God coming on her. And then she says, Neither did we remain any more courage in any man. So basically everybody was fearing the judgment of God or God's people coming because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. And so she's validating that she believes that their God is the only true and living God in heaven and in earth and in everywhere. She believes in their God. And so that's her faith. And so there's where she starts believing and gets brought into her family. And it says, Now therefore I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, you will show kindness unto my father's house. And so she's saying, look, since, I was nice and I hid y'all and I kept you safe and you didn't die, will you please help us when you come in to conquer our country so that we don't die? And then they make this little thing, but this is what's funny. In verse number 17, look at what the two spies said. And the men said unto her, we will be blameless of this thine oath. So they're about to promise her that her family will be safe. And then they're saying, we're going to be blameless of this. So they're saying, okay, in case something happens, we're not promising this, So it shows a little bit of their lack of faith right there. They don't have the faith. But then they go on, or they could have the extra faith, but then on down here you read, it says, behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line, and it goes down, and then they say, we're going to take you home. We're going to take you back home with us. And so then she gets a home with the family, the Lord's family. And it shall be, whosoever shall go out of these doors of the house. And basically he's saying, look, if people leave your house when we start to take over, we can't protect them. But, if we take and if they stay in your house, then God will protect you and your family. And so that's what they do. That's what they do indeed. And so then after that, they take and they go and she basically, they come in, they blow the trumpets, the walls fall and everything. And then they take her and all of her family outside the city, sit them down, and she watches her whole city burn. She watches the whole city burn. Now think about that. That's got to be pretty horrific, because everybody she knew, everybody she grew up with, everybody that she's, been a part of, all of her people, distant friends, people she's traded with, went to the grocery store and bought her bread from, and all that stuff. Everybody that Rahab knew, they watched the whole city burn, and everybody got slaughtered by God's people. But she chose God's family, and that's what she chose. And then they took her home with them. And so we thought that was really interesting. I thought that was really good. And anyway, so that's basically the story of her. So she went from having a house to having a home with God's people. And then not only that, but then, Rahab's mentioned in Hebrews. She's mentioned, I think, in another New Testament book. And it talks about how she's a hero in the faith. And she also becomes part of Christ's lineage. She's actually in the family line of Christ. So that's who she is. And so that's what it's like. And so two things that I'd like to mention is that when you take his name upon you, you become part of his household. And so, I remember, now my name in particular is not a great last name, at face value, but my family name has a long line of having decent folk in it. And my family's known as my family name's a respectable name. There's not any tarnishments really on that family name. They've not been perfect, but it carries a certain weight of honesty and integrity. And my dad always told me, he said, son, don't do anything to bring harm on your family's name, okay? And I'm sure as men, y'all probably had that same conversation with your dad at some point. Don't bring harm on your dad's name, okay? And so that's the same with the Lord's family. You don't want to bring, reproach on the Lord's name. You don't want to do that. So when you take on his name, you become part of his household. And not only that, like they told Rahab and her family, they said they'll save you alive. They'll save you. So the Lord will save you. When you become part of his family, you are saved. You don't have to worry about hell. You've got a home in the future. You don't ever have to worry about it. I went to a buddy of mine, a real close friend of mine. I'll just tell you the story. What time do we end Sunday school anyway? Is it 45 after? 45 after? 45? Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and tell you this story. So basically I had this real close friend of mine. His name was Kevin. And basically his brother ended up dying. And they asked me to come preach his funeral. And anyway, I got over there, and anyway, they started singing this song, and it's by the Williams Brothers, and it's called "If I Don't Wake Up." And I tell you that song, it hit me, and I got to thinking about it this week, and I downloaded it to my phone. I started listening to that song all week. And anyway, basically the song talks about, if I don't wake up, it'll be all right. I made things right with Jesus, and everything's going to be all right. And if I don't wake up, you don't have to worry. I've got a home up in glory. And, it brought such peace. I tell you, that's one of those songs. I'll never forget that song. But anyway, that song, I listened to that long and long. But anyway, it's a real, real good song. But anyway, it's true. When you take on the Lord's name, when you call upon the Lord's name to get saved, then you become part of His family. And you take on His name, and then you're saved alive. You'll also have a home in eternity, and forever and ever you'll be together. The other thing, too, I'll mention about the Lord's families is we went to a funeral a while back, and I walked by. We was up at Ingram's, and we were visiting somebody, I think one of Penny's friends. And anyway, we looked over, and there was a room over there, and there's like one lady sitting in there by herself and had a coffin sitting there. She's the only one in there, and I thought, well, it hadn't started yet or whatever. And then we went on into the room, like an hour or two passed, another hour or two passed, and we stayed with the family the whole time, I think. And then, it's been about 4 or 5 hours, and I walked by that room again. That lady's still sitting there by herself. And her husband, I'm assuming, is the one that died because he looked to be about the same age as her. And I felt so bad. My heart just broke for her. But I also thought, at the same time, I thought, you know what? If she went to church and she was born again and saved, she'd have a church family there with her. Several of y'all in this room, when my mom died, y'all came all the way over to Gainesville, and I'll never forget it, and I appreciate it. But I was surrounded by my church family. And also, that means something. When you're there during hard times, having the Lord's family, your church family there, means a lot. And Penny and I, we don't have a lot of friends. We don't have, probably count all the friends we have, on one or two fingers, you know what I mean? But now church friends and church family, we've got tons of them. Everywhere we go, we run into church family. And I'm part of that family, and you are too if you're saved. No matter what church people go to, if they're born-again believers, you're part of their family. And so wherever you go, you got that family all around you. And you'll say, hey, I know so-and-so, they go to so-and-so. They may go to a different church, but they're part of the family. That's your cousins, I guess you could say. They may not live in the same house, but they love you and all that. And so I just wanted to end with that this morning. And we'll, I guess I won't turn it back over to anybody, but has anybody got a word or testimony or anything? If not, then I'll tell you one more quick story. Anybody got a word or testimony real quick? All right, I'll tell you one story. So a long time ago, Pastor of mine, Dwayne Smith, told this story, and I never forgot this. In fact, I wrote this story in calligraphy and gave it to my mother. So a long time ago, there was a young man, and this young man basically, this one girl caught his eye, and he thought, oh, she is beautiful. Oh, I love this lady. She is something else. And anyway, she was known to have a bad reputation, this girl was, and so anyway, he kept chasing after her, and he loved this girl to death, thought she was beautiful. And anyway, but she was evil. And the more he got to know her, the more evil he realized she was. And then finally, she's like, look, if we're going to be together, I want you to do me one thing to prove your love to me. And he said, well, what is it? Anything you want, I'll do anything. If you'll just, if you'll do this one thing, And so anyway, he took and he said, anything you want, I'll do for you. And his mother was known for being a righteous, good woman, a good woman. And so anyway, she couldn't stand it because she was evil. She was an evil girl, an evil young lady. And anyway, she said, I want you to cut your mother's heart out and bring it to me in a jar. And he thought, what? How horrible is that? How horrible is that? And so he went, he thought, well, I love her and I'm going to do it. So he went to cut his mother's heart out, and he did. He cut his mother's heart out, put it in a jar, and he had his mother's heart in a jar, and he was going back to the young girl. And then he tripped and fell and broke the jar and landed on top of the jar. And the words he heard was, "Are you all right, son? Are you okay?" No matter what you do, it doesn't matter the circumstances, nothing can stop a mother's love. So I'll end right there.